afternoon. Nothing says last talk of the day like technical difficulties, huh? Good times. All right, so who's excited to talk about micro frontends? This is a very lively audience. Thank you. I love it. Okay. Oh, sorry. I've got a slow frame rate, so this is going to troll me a little bit. Next slide. Okay, there we go. So my name is Jennifer Wadella. I hail from the United States. You can follow me on the xBird site at like OMG it's Fetty until it crashes. I'm the VP of Front-End Engineering at Bitovi, which is a JavaScript consulting company based out of the States. I deal with clients and see the kind of architectural challenges they're trying to solve. I see the technical choices they're making. I see the sometimes poor technical choices they're making. And my company does the best that we can to kind of help them do things a little bit of a better way. And that's actually where a lot of my talk comes from today, are the experiences that I've seen and heard about with my clients attempting to implement micro frontends, especially when they had some tech leadership, attend a tech conference, and heard about how great micro frontends are, and because that one speaker said it as a conference, they have to go do it. Doesn't matter if it makes sense for their company or not, they have to go do it, right? Ugh. We need help in this industry sometimes, y'all. Because you know what, this is what I look like every time one of my clients tells me that they think they need to implement micro frontends. Except my poker face is not that good. And yeah, again, they are hearing about micro frontends, they're seeing these people use it, and it's that new shiny thing, right? We love that new shiny in tech. We think it's gonna bring better tomorrows and rainbows and sunshines and puppies, and that is absolutely not the case. Micro frontends are not going to solve all your problems. Probably they're going to create some more, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But to get things started, we're going to quickly define what micro frontends are. Is everybody somewhat familiar? A couple people? Okay, or maybe some people have heard the term micro frontends and still don't know what the hell that means. I like your honesty, sir. I like your honesty. One of my pet peeves is when people say, oh, well, it's like microservices for the front end. No, stop it. That is not what it is. Similar concepts, yes, but we deal with very different concerns on the front end. We care about things like how much code are we shipping to the browser? How are we dealing with event input from the user? How are we interacting with APIs? We just have very different concerns in the way that we're approaching things. And we have some CSS to sling on top of it. So micro frontends are not microservices for the front end. This is the definition that I think I like the most as far as capturing what micro frontends are, and that is an architectural style where independently deliverable front-end applications are composed into a greater whole. And there are a couple words here that I think matter. Let's talk about deliverable, the idea of independently deliverable, things that we can take, we can make changes to, and then we can deliver separately, along with being composed into a greater whole. So I like the word composition here because it makes me think of music. It makes me think of a piece of music that is composed well. The notes make sense together. The words make sense together. So when we're dealing with micro frontends, the goal is to take all these disparate applications and compose them into a greater whole so the user has no idea what's going on because they're just seeing the greater composition. Does that happen in reality when we implement these most of the time? No, it does not. I think we're going to go ahead and skip. I do have a quick demo where I talk about a single SPA application, but I'm going to skip that part because we lost some time for issues, and I'm just going to do a quick visual demo of a micro front-end architecture. So this is my fake example app where I am trying to sell products because I hail from corporate America and money, money, money. So in my application, this is just showing one micro front end right now. So this is a standalone Angular application that is running inside of this green box that you see, and this is just a basic navigation. We have a list link and we have a home link. So we click into here, we click into our list, and now you're going to see two different micro front ends on this page. We still have that navigation persisting, but now we have a new list micro front end. So this is a different Angular application, and all that Angular application is doing is making an API request to apparently a broken API that's not showing my Animal Crossing villagers. That's sad. But showing a list of villagers and allowing a user to do some filtering and sorting and resetting. So if I click into one of these villagers, I have a new view here. We still have that navigation persisting, but now we see two different micro front ends. And so the micro front end that you're seeing on the left is a application, another Angular application, and that application's only responsibility is to show information about that item that we have navigated to. In the real world, we would probably have a development team, and this is their responsibility. This page is what they want to do. But let's say business comes along and they're like, hey, you know what? I think we can sell more villagers. And I think we can do that if we show similar villagers to the one already on that page. So they spin up a new development team, they get a business analyst on board, they get a UX team on board, and they dream up this amazing design, and they show similar villagers to the one already displaying. So we build a new micro front end, we slap it in our application, and we call it good. So this is kind of a basic demo that I'll refer to a little bit throughout the talk, but that's what our concept is here, is each of these are independently deployed applications. If you were to go to localhost like 4001 or wherever I have one of these displayed serving locally, you would see just that standalone application. So this is the idea that we have this one very coherent, composed, user-facing application that we are comprising of different micro front ends that we can build separately, that we can deploy separately at different times. All right. Come on, lag. There we go. All right, so there are a couple core ideas behind micro front ends that are supposed to guide the way we're doing things. And number one is to be technology agnostic, the idea of breaking those Angular chains, breaking those React chains, and not forcing us to build entire front end applications in just one technology. They focus on isolating team code, so each team is responsible for a micro front end. One of the other core ideas is to establish team prefixes, so have an understanding of the code we're writing. Is that code coming from this application or that application? How are we naming those, and how are we dealing with that with team prefixes? One of the other core ideas behind micro front ends is to favor native browser features over custom APIs. And this is where I really start to take issue with this idea, because we've been in framework wars for at least a decade, y'all. When's the last time you wrote vanilla JavaScript? We don't do it that often anymore. We have grown up in the time of React or Angular or Vue or Svelte, and we don't learn how to manipulate the DOM manually by ourselves. We learn to do it through React. We learn to input bind that way. We learn to access forms through the Angular Forms API. We have completely lost sight of the JavaScript that happens under the page that is actually doing the magic. And with micro front ends, they are encouraging us to re-embrace that. But we have an entire generation of software engineers who've never experienced that. They have no idea what's happening outside of their framework. And so to expect that kind of knowledge level for implementing this sort of architecture pattern is a serious problem. And finally, there's an idea of building a resilient site, but if you've had any adventures in DevOps land, you know this is hard enough for one application, let alone however many are composing your micro front end architecture. So, there are some problems that micro front ends can solve. And so when people set out to implement micro front ends, they're typically going for one of these problems. They can allow incremental upgrades. I've actually worked with clients before that were working on upgrading from AngularJS to modern Angular. This requires an entire rewrite, and that is a massive undertaking for a lot of companies. And so what we can do with micro front ends is we can use a strangler pattern, and we can start to pull out pieces of that old application, rewrite them in the new code, and ship those to the browser so the user doesn't know the difference, and do that slowly over time. This is possible with micro front end architecture. It is much harder said than done. We can also ship pieces of an application independently. I think this is probably one of the biggest drivers for micro front end adoption. The idea is that we can have teams that can update and ship features, test, do everything, and then deploy without having to wait for the rest of the application to catch up, to get smaller iterations, quicker release cycles. And yes, you definitely do have that power available to you with micro front end architecture. This also pushes us toward product-focused teams, allowing teams to be focused on a specific area of the business, a specific feature. And this is something I very much do advocate for. Software is complicated, but so are the businesses that we are building that software for. And to build good software, we need to truly understand that business. And so when we break apart the business, when we break apart into features, we are able to focus more narrowly on really creating the best user experience just by doing that. And so with micro front ends, it allows us to further embrace this product-focused team structure. And then yes, it does allow us to have autonomous teams that want to use their own framework. We're JavaScript developers. We're picky as hell. Angular developers don't want to write React. React developers don't want to write Vue. Nobody wants to write Backbone.js anymore, sad face. Okay, Y'all are dating yourselves, and I like it. I like it. So this does allow us to start to explore using different front-end frameworks to bring together a whole application. But did we stop to think if we should? There are a lot of companies using micro frontends. I don't know if you've ever been to AWS and tried to find something. That is micro frontend architecture at its finest, y'all. Seriously, every time I go in and I try and figure out like where the hell Route 53 is, it's a new experience all over again. So there are a lot of companies that are embracing this architecture successfully, unsuccessfully, mixed bag. Okay. There are also a variety of micro frontend approaches. And to be clear, micro frontends are not a new concept. They are just a newly coined concept. We've been doing micro frontends as long as we've been using iframes. You want an application, another application, shove it in an iframe, call it a day. You laugh, but it's still a valid approach. Some of the other approaches we've used are server-side compilation. Maybe you have some sort of Java application where you are catching things at a route and serving up different pieces of JavaScript. This is an approach I saw with the company we were helping upgrade from AngularJS to Angular. There are some new tools that are coming out. So the demo that I showed you earlier is in a stitching framework called Single SPA. And this is kind of my recommended starting point for people wanting to get familiar with micro frontends. I feel like it offers the most understandable way to start approaching things. There's a templating option that essentially allows you to write out your elements the same way you're familiar with writing HTML, and then hook in your micro frontends on a prop on some of those components. And so I feel like it gives a good visual representation and makes things really clear, versus if you jump into module federation with Webpack and half that stuff isn't even documented, you're just like, I don't know what's going on. That being said, module federation has been one of the widest adopted tools for micro frontend architecture. It does some stuff. It's not well documented. I am going to talk about various issues we've run into using it, but that's out there. We've got a lot of other companies or open source providers that are definitely understanding that this is an architecture pattern that people are trying to figure out how to build, and they are doing their best to support it. Vercel has been exploring a concept called multi-zones. And then throwing back a little, we still have good old web components. Probably the most success I've been seeing with clients lately are by adopting a web component based architecture. Angular Elements tried to do this a while back with the ability to basically take your Angular application or a piece of it, wrap it in an Angular element, and make it a web component that can be used anywhere. My company actually has created a similar concept called React to Web Component, where you wrap an entire React application into a web component, and then that gives you a little bit more maneuverability to start to compose into a whole front-end application. So lots of different approaches that are out there for implementing micro frontends. And if you've been listening to this talk and you're like, hey, Jennifer, I'm still not discouraged, like whatever, micro frontends sound awesome, let's go, let's do this. I'm gonna say, hang on, you little Frankensteins, because I've got some stories for you to consider before you go down this pathway. All right, so let's talk through a couple scenarios that I have seen in my last few years of attempting to guide clients. Scenario number one is we have a new team that spins up and starts to work on a new feature. Okay, so a couple things are gonna happen. This new team has been given this line item by business. They're like, hey, I'm gonna go out, we're gonna write the code, we're gonna make sure it satisfies our requirements, QA is happy, we're gonna ship it, and we're gonna call it a day. What really happens is this team starts inadvertently replicating code. They need to make a request to the login API to get user data. They need to make another request based on that user's profile ID to get some more data. And then they need to write a couple handler libraries and utility libraries to handle that data and display it in a certain way in the UI. They don't realize that some of this code is already floating around inside a micro frontend, so they just rewrite it. But you know what? They're meeting their requirements. It's good. They ship it. It lands in the page, and all of a sudden, this application performance is tanking, because they've added all this new code to the browser. They've added all these new API requests to the browser. I've worked with clients before where we've gone through their really terrible state management implementation and found like 72 API requests to the same API. And that was in one application. That wasn't in like 20 spread across an app. So a lot of problems can happen very quickly. All right, so scenario number two is we have a critical bug that gets logged over the weekend. QA team is screaming about it, everybody is screaming about it, but here's the problem with the micro frontend architecture. Who gets that bug? That reporter might not know what micro frontend that bug belongs to. So whose responsibility is it? Who is even going to be able to figure out whose responsibility it is? What is going to happen to this bug? All right, scenario number 3, we've got the UX team, and they've dreamed up a brilliant new design. They have a requirement, and they're like, you know what, we have this old date picker, but we need a super duper date picker. And we're going to design that, and we're going to build it, and we're going to ship it, and it's going to be amazing. So they do this. The dev team's really on board because we love writing date pickers. And they go ahead and ship this, and so they ship it, everything's great, and then the CEO's sitting there on a Saturday morning, he's browsing the company website, and he notices there are 2 different date pickers, and flips his lid. Because now this one part of the application has a completely different look and feel from the rest of the application, and it starts to get a really disjointed experience. Scenario number 3, we've got a dev team, and they ship a change request on an app. We've got a micro frontend architecture where our different micro frontends are depending on information from each other because they are trying to avoid making the same repeated API calls, so they're just going to pass that information back and forth. Well, one of the teams ships a change. Their unit tests are passing, so it's fine, but they changed one of those dependencies of another app, and now that other app is broken. Whose responsibility is that to fix it? Who's going to fix it? I don't know. Scenario number 5, this is a fun one. The team is using Module Federation to implement micro frontends, and they are using Next.js. And they hear about Next.js 13, and they're really excited because they want to take advantage of server components and the new router. But then when they do that, they get this error. Super easy one to figure out, right? Except it's showing up for everything everywhere. So this team is completely roadblocked, and what they find out after they talk to the people behind Module Federation is they're actually using a forked version of Module Federation, which is basically a bunch of regexes trying to figure out all the right files. Super solid, super solid. And they get told, read the documentation, but the documentation doesn't mention any of this. The release notes don't mention any of this. There's an open GitHub issue that is being actively ignored by the contributors. What's the team going to do? Like, they are completely roadblocked. They can't upgrade. They can't do anything. They're all in on Next.js. They're all in on Module Federation. Stuck. They're stuck, y'all. All right, scenario number 6. Let's jump over to Angular. We've got a mid-level engineer on the team. They've been slinging Angular code for a while. They're pretty good at getting stuff out the door. But they encounter this weird Zone.js error. This is one of the first things that I actually ran into when I started playing with micro frontend implementation in Angular. Zone.js is the library that Angular's change detection is built on top of. And some of the best Angular engineers I know don't go near that shit. It's a black box of magic. We don't want to touch it. It just works. We don't want to think about it. Well, when you start running multiple Angular apps in sync, you start to run into Zone.js errors real fast. Have fun with those. All right, and then finally, scenario number 7, we've got a team. They take over an application rewrite. They're using the Strangler pattern. They're going to slowly take pieces of the old app and update them and incorporate a new component library that is going to match the UX team standards. What happens is code starts going out the door. The UX team is looking at this. They are noticing discrepancies between what they think, but they have no idea to tell what is new and what is old. The QA team has no idea how to tell what is old, what is new. They're Apple. If things aren't pixel perfect, people's jobs are on the line, but nobody has any idea what piece of the application is actually there. And even the development teams that are working on their separate pieces have no idea about the other pieces that have been shipped. This is not fun. And the answer is not more code to solve this problem either. All right, so we've talked through a couple, in my opinion, scary and pretty unpleasant scenarios that didn't have any real clear answers of how to get out of them or how to handle them well. So let's talk about the problems that micro frontends can't solve that I constantly hear people saying, hey, this is my problem. I think I need micro frontends, right? No. Number 1, writing better code. No. It's not going to happen. Shipping good, small, maintainable, clean code is hard. It's hard for a reason, y'all. Micro frontends can help us do some stuff, but they're not a silver bullet, and they're sure as hell not going to help people write better code. I've also heard a lot of people say, hey, well, we really want to share code. Just use a freaking mono repo. It's going to save you so much headache. This is like probably one of the #1 fights I have with clients. I'm like, just slap it in a lib, use a mono repo, call it a day. NX makes excellent tooling. You don't have to create some like insane, crazy monolith just for this one thing. Like mono repos have gotten a really bad rep. They have their applications. Just use a mono repo. Application performance. This came from I think he was a CEO of a company. They had a .NET application, and he's like, our app's really slow. We need micro frontends, right? I'm like, absolutely not. I've seen how y'all .NET people write code. You'll have like 6 different versions of jQuery running in there and have no idea. So micro frontends, you're going to be shipping more JavaScript to the browser. You're shipping more frameworks to the browser. You're making more API requests. All those things equal less performance. Micro frontends will not give you better application performance. They will probably make it far worse. Here's a fun one. What problems will micro frontends absolutely cause you? You're going to start to deal with bloat due to duplicated code. And some of this is unavoidable. You're going to write the same things, but by the principle of these autonomous teams, they shouldn't even know about code that the other teams are writing, and you're going to inadvertently have duplicated code and the bloat from that. That's something that you're just going to have to get over unless everybody is psychic and knows exactly all the code that everybody else is writing. You're going to have difficulty maintaining code quality. Teams struggle with this enough at one code base, let alone a bunch of disparate ones. I've heard clients want to embrace micro frontend architecture because of feature releases, and they don't want devs to be able to see other teams' code. It's not fun. Performance problems. We talked about this quite a bit already. Responsibility confusion, when we start to break pieces apart, but we don't have a clear understanding or an overhead picture of what belongs to what or what belongs where, it's very, very hard to figure out where that responsibility chain is. Where should things happen? Who is responsible for a bug? Who is responsible for end-to-end testing? Where are those lines? Upgrade roadblocks. We saw the very real one with dealing with Next.js and Module Federation. Webpack, Module Federation, pretty established. Next.js, pretty established. But starting to use things together, shit is hitting the fan. So there will be upgrade roadblocks, and your team will suffer from them. And here's my favorite one to talk about. When we start adopting micro frontend architecture, we are having to solve the same front-end problems again that we have been solving for the last 10 years. And you know how we solve them? By using one framework on one page. So when we start embracing micro frontends, we have to figure out routing all over again. Y'all want to write more routers? No, it sucks. I never have to think about it when I'm writing Angular code. It's the best thing ever. But if we're using micro frontends, I might need to understand how the Angular router works in order to figure out how it works with one of the, I don't even know how many React routers that are floating around in their ecosystem right now. But this is something that we have not had to think about and are now having to re-architect. We need to figure out cross-app communication. In Angular, we rely heavily on RxJS for our messaging. Does that make sense for a component-driven architecture approach with React? How are we going to bridge that gap? Bloat due to complicated code, sharing common code. Again, when people are saying, oh, well, we don't want to rewrite code, we want to share things, we want to reach for micro frontends. Well, you still have to figure out how you're going to share that code effectively, and it can be really problematic. Talked a lot about consistent style in UX. This is the one thing that actually has a solution, and that is building good design systems and building good component libraries. The way that plays out in reality, however, is you go down that path, it takes time to build those things. It takes time to build component libraries. And in the meantime, teams still need to be shipping features, right? And if you don't get their component delivered in time in that library, they're going to build it themselves in some janky-ass CSS. It's the way it works. It's the way it will always work. Business will always rule and drive deadlines. We have to figure out deployment automation. If your company struggles to deploy one app, how are you going to deploy 20? Code quality maintenance, we mentioned already. Breaking changes between applications, we need to refigure that out. And here's a very, very fun one. With micro frontends, we are still doing a very basic concept that we don't have to think about using frameworks anymore, and that is shoving shit in the browser and hopefully pulling it back out. And so, we, again, have an entire generation of software engineers who have never actually bound an event listener or a click handler to the browser to understand that we actually need to unbind that when we clean up and remove components. or we're going to run into performance issues really, really quick. Well, with micro frontends, we're doing that same thing. We're shoving stuff into the browser and we're taking it back out. But now we're having to think about that cleanup, and you might not even realize you need to think about that cleanup until your app is tanking and nobody can figure out why. We also need to figure out testing. Unit tests, that's one thing, we can figure that out, but end-to-end testing, where are those boundaries? Who's responsible for what flows? What should they be testing? This all becomes much more complex in a micro frontend architecture. So, is there a way to adopt micro frontends and profit? Maybe. So I do want to give you some tips and tricks that I've seen, well, not that I've seen, but that I've encountered that will help you get through some of these problems. And I'm going to give you a huge spoiler alert, none of them have to do with code. I hope you're catching a theme here. Number one is you need to understand your team's limits. You need to understand their skill level, their foresight capabilities, because they are going to encounter scenarios where they have to debug their way out of breaking changes and figure out how to do that. There are a lot of really smart developers building these libraries and building these open source tools, and then there's the rest of us. So unless you're confident that most of your team can be up here to figure out these problems, or know like the weird in the weeds things that happened at that higher level, you need to think about that and then consider your tools and approaches appropriately. You need to focus on communication. We're terrible at this in one application, so we're going to be 10 times more terrible at it across 10 applications. But focusing on communication first is key. When we talk about breaking changes between apps or the way things are going to communicate, one of the things we can do is consider adopting consumer-driven contracts ahead of time. So that is sitting down and thinking about the code we're writing, the code we're building, and the way they're going to communicate and what they're going to expect for each other, and saying, hey, we're going to give you this, you're going to give us this. If something changes, if something breaks, this is how we're going to handle it. You also need to work on fostering opportunities for communication across different verticals. So when you're dealing with an environment where you've got all these disparate dev teams working on these different things, sometimes having some level of technical oversight is really, really helpful. I like the concept of calling this a technical shepherd, a code shepherd. Somebody whose their sole responsibility is to herd the flock. They have an idea of what's going on with all the different micro frontends. They can help spot communication gaps, potential breaking changes and issues, and be that bridge between all the micro frontends instead of everybody doing their own thing and then stepping on each other's toes. You need to prioritize collaboration. This goes along with communication, but agree on things like naming conventions up front. One of the examples that people have reached to for micro frontend application communication is cookies in the browser. Not the best idea, but it's working. But then when you're doing something like that, how do you know whose cookie is what? And same thing goes for CSS or events that we're slopping on the window, because that's happening again too. But agreeing on these kind of naming conventions up front, so when the inevitable happens, somebody needs to debug or figure out something, there's some sort of naming structure or prefix so you can determine where that thing came from. You definitely need to figure out deployment. One of the things that I tell clients is your micro frontends are only as good as your ability to successfully and seamlessly deploy them. One of our clients, they were hosting their micro frontends on an internal NPM registry. Sometimes that shit would take 6 hours to become live. And so you've got QA screaming because, oh, well, I've done, it's deployed. I've drop kicked the ticket over to the QA column, and the QA is like, hey, this isn't here. Well, no, it's stuck up here trying to deploy still. So if you don't have those good CI/CD structures in place first, you're going to be fighting a constant uphill battle that's going to cause problems in all these other areas. And you need to keep in mind that if the goal is for us to be able to ship these things independently, that means separate pipelines. That means separate infrastructure for each of these applications. It's a lot of work. You need to commit to documentation. One of the really common things that happens with teams working on these different features is those features may come and go. A team spins up, they build their new feature. Well, okay, that feature's done. There's no longer a product roadmap because it's complete. And so that team might get split up and go to another team. Or maybe they get told to go build a new feature. Well, that's like onboarding a new developer all over again into a different micro frontend. There might be different coding standards if it's inside of a different framework, a different deployment process. So you're taking that onboarding expense and you're magnifying it every time somebody jumps project to project. The way you reduce this expense is committing to better documentation upfront and making sure any developer that jumps from micro frontend to micro frontend can read the docs and be effective and be able to submit a pull request almost immediately. And this is a shameless plug. You should have experts on call for backup. This is where my company comes in a lot. Like, I wish we would come in earlier to be able to tell our clients, no, this is a terrible idea and this is why. But most of the time we come in and get called in to fight the fire. So if you are already in this situation and you're like, either we need help or I need you to come tell our technical leadership that they're being dumb and we shouldn't do this, hit me up, I'm happy. But it's not a bad idea to have resources. And these resources are not just, a consulting agency. They could be people behind the tools you're using, having connections at Angular, having connections at React, having connections at Webpack. But not all of us have that network to fall back on. It's not like you can just Slack message one of those people. So definitely be aware that your team might run into problems that you need outside support for. Big picture, micro frontend tooling is still very, very new. Like, we're not really calling things alpha or beta, but these things are not as battle tested as people may believe. There's a lot evolving. It's an exciting time. Like, that's one of the great things about front end development is we are pushing constantly. We're trying to figure out better ways to do things, better ways to build software. But this is very, very new, and the tooling is very, very new, and I cannot reiterate that enough. There's also no singular micro frontend solution. I get this question all the time, from clients or when I give this talk. And the problems that people are trying to solve with this architectural approach, the constraints from business that they're dealing with that they think this architectural approach will help with, are so disparate and so varied. There's not one singular micro frontend solution that is going to help. The only thing that can help you is what I talked about earlier for success. It's good communication, it's documentation, it's understanding your team members' limitations. Those are the only things that are going to help you. There's not one tool to rule them all. I don't know if there ever will be. I think this is too broad of a problem that we are ever going to see that silver bullet for micro frontend architecture. It's just too disparate. So big picture here, TLDR, in my opinion, micro frontends should solve business problems, not technical ones. When we talk about splitting apps to focus on features, when we talk about being able to deploy, things separately faster to users, those are really business constraints. If your problem isn't directly related to a product or a business need, you probably don't need micro frontends. Micro frontends aren't going to give you better performance. They're not going to help you write better code. They're not going to help you share code better. They're going to solve business problems. A couple resources if you're already down this rabbit hole or if it's going to happen, I understand that. I do want to help you along your journey. So if you just want to play with the idea of micro frontends, get a quick proof of concept running, I do really recommend SingleSpa.js. If you're already dealing with Module Federation, one of my team members wrote a blog post on doing micro frontends with Module Federation, and they've documented all those configuration options that aren't in the docs. Like, we literally groomed through the code, thank you, TypeScript, to pull out these different configuration options and kind of add some documentation for what those different things are and what they mean. If you're a React person and you're like, this React to web component, that sounds like it could be something. We've got a demo blog post, React Everywhere with Vite and React to web component. And then finally, I am a co-host of the Angular Plus show, which is a podcast, and we did an entire micro frontend architecture series. I think there are about 4 episodes. But my favorite one was definitely the one we did with Luca. Luca is one of the thought leaders in the micro frontend space. He's seen it all and just has some very sage, very real advice. I want him to be my life coach. But that's a really great episode that kind of talks about what micro frontends are, benefits, problems. Really great listen. So that is all I have for y'all today. I am on time, even with technical difficulties. Go me. Which I think we should have a couple moments left for questions, but these slides are available at microfrontendproblems.jenniferwadella.com. I've also built a helpful flowchart at shouldiusemicrofrontends.com. I'm sure you can assume where that's going, but you can still click and check it out. So that is all I have for you. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, you lovely human beings.